the key two things that we want you to be doing in Smart Assessor are your off-the-job training record and your work experience portfolio. And they're two completely different, separate things. And I think as soon as you've got that clear in your own mind, that helps. It helps to understand that the two are not at all overlapping and by definition should be mutually exclusive. So essentially, to differentiate between the two, the first thing you have to ask yourself about any period of time is, have I been doing new learning? If you've been doing new learning, it's off the job training by definition. And learning can be anything which affects any of either the knowledge, so things that you might be studying as part of your tuition modules, but also the 10 skills and behaviours as well. So the leadership, the communication, the business insight, the building relationships, all of those things. If you are doing new learning or development on any of them, it's off the job training. In terms of the format of the two, work experience, where you are demonstrating competence you already have and you're clear it's not off the job training, that needs to be in a separate Word document or ideally the template that we provide. I'll come on to all of that in a minute. If it's off the job training, it just needs to go as an entry in your time log. The other key difference is work experience is always in units of days. Off the job training is always in units of hours. And for the off the job training, it can be concise. We just need to create a credible audit trail. So off the job training is going to be anything that is defined as learning that you undertake in work time. So it's got to be during your contracted work hours, not evenings, not weekends, not bank holidays, not any day you take as leave. But it isn't your regular day-to-day job that you're going to write up as work experience. Okay. Stop me if you want me to slow down, but I'm hoping these are things that you know, but just things that I think it helps to clarify, because we can do this better if we understand the why, I think, as well as the how. So off the job training is a contractual promise that your employer makes in line with the Department for Education. And up until recently, it has been an average of about 6 hours a week of your contracted working hours. For people who started in this most recent September 25 intake, they've changed the rules. And it's actually now a minimum, which has been defined by the Department for Education for each separate apprenticeship standard. So if you're newly enrolled in September, then the way your off-the-job training hours have been arrived at will be different to if you were newly enrolled in July of 25 or before then. Okay, September and December, it will be the same minimum for that apprenticeship standard for all of you, but that can be reduced if you have got exemptions and you're going to be on a shorter programme. So the critical thing is not to compare your off-the-job total with anybody else's. We've calculated it for you on the rules that were in place when your apprenticeship started. So if it's different to a colleague, then that's for a good reason, and that's just the way it is. That's the minimum that you have got to clear. If we're going to be allowed to put you through Gateway using the Department for Education's funding, you've got to clear that minimum that is calculated on their rules, their formula, or their minimum per standard on the day that you started. But we also arrive at a planned total for you, which is always higher. And we always make sure that just your tuition side of preparing for the modules, the exams, doing the things that we identify as essential on the course is more than the minimum. So if you're capturing everything that should count as off-the-job training, you should have no trouble at all clearing the minimum hours that you need. So in some weeks you'll be doing more because you'll be attending 2 tuition sessions. But the critical thing is that you must maintain some off-the-job training in every calendar month all the way through your programme. If we don't have an audit trail that shows that you've done some off-the-job training in every single calendar month, then the Department for Education says that we have to place you on a break in learning or if we don't have a credible plan to get you back in learning, we have to withdraw you from funding. So that's not my rules. That's not me being difficult. And I know that it must sometimes feel, when you've got exam pressures, when you've got lots of work pressures going on, that my team pop up in your inbox sounding all naggy and going, you haven't done your off-the-job training for the last month. You've got to do your off-the-job training. And you must think, really, people, I have a million things to do. I don't have time for this off-the-job training thing. But the difficulty is, if we don't have that audit trail, we can't keep drawing the Department for Education's apprenticeship levy funding. And the last thing I want to do is take you off programme. And that's particularly true because of the government's recent changes to availability to level 7 funding. From the 1st of January 2026, only an apprentice who is under 22 on their first day in learning would be eligible to join a funded level 7 programme. So less than 6% of the people who start on the CIPFA apprenticeship are under 22 on their first day in learning. So for the vast majority of us, if I am forced to take you off programme, I am never going to be able to put you back on programme. So it is critical that we keep these off-the-job training audit trails super clean, so that there is no question about our ability to keep claiming funding for you. If you're safely on programme, and you stay on programme because we stay compliant with the Department for Education's requirements, you are guaranteed to be funded to the end of your programme. And that's true even if we need to use a break in learning for a legitimate reason. So there are lots of legitimate reasons for a break. Ill health, caring responsibilities, maternity or paternity leave, all sorts of reasons that you might genuinely need a break. And if we need to use that, we still safely can use that and return you to learning after the break and keep you funded until you complete the programme and gain your CIPFA qualification. So I don't want anyone to be panicking or worrying about that funding change. But what I do want to say is, my team aren't nagging because they find nagging fun. They're nagging because it is really important that we keep you cleanly audit trailed to keep you funded and on programme. Because if we do have to drop you off, can't bring you back now. So in Smart Assessor, the key things that you need to be looking for are quite easy to find once you get used to it. So these are the two key pages that you're going to use when you're uploading off-the-job training into Smart Assessor. And on the left-hand side here, I'm just capturing, I am going to try and come out and go live into the Smart Assessor Test Learner site, assuming that this poor aged laptop can cope with all of this at once. But when you go into your level 7 learning tile, your off-the-job tile in your own e-portfolio, you can set the filters at the top left here. So you use the top drop down just to pick courses not set within an episode. I know that sounds weird, but it's the only option, so you can't pick the wrong one. And then once you've done that, you use that third row to filter for off the job. As soon as you've done that, it will bring up your minimum off-the-job hours. So the off-the-job hours required, they're shown in that little box on the right-hand side now as 847 hours. Now, the test learner we set up a long time ago, so they've on paper completed their programme. So what matches underneath it is off-the-job hours required to date. That's also showing as 847, because in my test learner, they've done all of their time on programme. So those two numbers are the same. But for you, you would expect those two numbers to be different. So the off-the-job hours required, the 847 in this example, is the minimum that you have got to clear across your whole programme. So 3.5 years. The number under it, the off-the-job hours required to date, Smart Assessor proratas your off-the-job hours across your programme. So to be on track to get your total by the end of the programme, you would expect to have matched whatever that off-the-job hours required to date is. And that's what Smart Assessor will show a positive or a negative balance for. So let's just see. Hopefully you can see on my screen now the test learner in Smart Assessor. And we're in the overview tab of your portfolio. And we've got this off-the-job hours tile, which is showing for the test learner a positive balance of 24 hours. That's saying you're 24 hours ahead of the pro rata amount we would have expected by today. And if you stay in credit, if you stay adding off the job training at the same rate as you have done so far, then you'll clear your minimum by the end. Now, any good audit trail has a margin of safety. So we always say, don't aim for the minimum, aim for the plan. Aim to have a margin on top of the minimum. Because if a Department for Education auditor turned up and picked you in their sample and started going through your off-the-job training log, going, I don't like that entry, I want that entry out, I don't want any risk that they could then reduce you below the minimum. Bottom line is, if the auditor turns up and takes a look at your record and says, there are a couple of entries here that we don't think are compliant and we want to come out, okay, as long as you're still above your minimum without those entries, nobody cares. Okay, so that margin of safety is to create exactly that, some safety net, just in case you were ever picked for an audit sample. So if I click into that tile, you can see that we've got that total there. I'm going to drop down the only option for selecting an episode, and then I'm going to drop down and say off the job. Okay, so my off the job hours are then showing my required of 847 and my required to date of 847, because this is a learner who has finished their program. Now you'll also see below here this warning. What this warning says is that there are only certain things that count as off-the-job training. Now, it lists the things that don't count, which are the tabs for the work experience log, because remember we said by definition, off-the-job and work experience are mutually exclusive. So if you call something work experience, it can't be off-the-job training. Similarly, you have a Gateway Level 7 tab where we sign everything off at the end. By definition, when you've reached the end and we're talking about the Gateway Level 7 tab or the project report, actual 16 questions and their answers as part of your endpoint assessment, by definition, they can't be new learning either, because you're supposed to be fully competent by then. That's the whole point. We're putting you through Gateway because you're fully competent. So don't choose those things when you make a new time log entry, because Smart Assessor won't allow those to count as off-the-job training. So when you want to add a new entry, you simply hit the big pink button that says Add New Time Log Entry, and you work through the questions that it asks you. Most of them are self-explanatory in terms of the date, the activity. You can pick lots of things, traditional face-to-face session if you've been to a class, coaching or mentoring, that could be with your work-based learning coach or with your manager at work or with a colleague. It doesn't really matter which one you pick, they will all count as off-the-job training. So I'm just going to leave it as a virtual training session. And then you select the course. And this is the bit that matters. Okay, if you select the project report, the gateway or work experience, Smart Assessor will not count it as off-the-job training, because we've just agreed that by definition it can't be. So you're either going to pick the professional qualification, and then you can choose a unit that matches the module you're studying, PSFR, BR, DSDA, yeah. Or you're going to pick the Accountancy and Taxation Standard, and that would then let you leave it either as general, which you absolutely can do, just leave it as general, or skills or behaviours or knowledge, whichever you thought was most relevant. So let's say I've done some off-the-job training, I've had a session that is on communication, I'm going to pick It's against the professional standard. It's a skill. It's communication. You don't need to pick an assessor. Now, for 6, you always want to pick off the job if you want it to count in your off-the-job training. But by picking either the professional qualification or the professional standard, it's defaulted already to off-the-job for me. So it's telling me it's off-the-job training, it's going to count in my total. You fill in the time, and you can use that with the little movie bar, or you can actually type in a time, or you can just add and say it was an hour. Okay, if you put in a start time, you don't have to put in a start time, but if you did put in a start time of, say, 10 o'clock, then because I've said that it lasted an hour, it's already given me an activity end time an hour later. And then you need to type what you have learned. What you're trying to say to this potential auditor is, this is off-the-job training because I went on a course on my presentation skills, for example, which improved my communication. So what you would write in there is, attended a presentation course which improved my presentation and communication skills. You've mentioned communication. It's one of the skills in the apprenticeship standard. It's indisputably, therefore, off-the-job training. And then you would hit add activity. Okay. So, clunky as it is, if you just follow the steps and work through what it's asking you to do, it does do what it says on the tin. And here are a couple of examples of entries that we use as part of the induction. So we had the induction in September, for those of you that are perhaps new students in September, where you completed the ethics course as part of that induction day. And we then said, right, let's load your completion of the ethics course as your first piece of off-the-job training. And I've got 2 examples of doing that we do on that induction day to illustrate that there is a good entry and a slightly less good entry. Completion of the ethics course, it's not a terrible entry. It does at least mention ethics, and ethics are firmly part of the knowledge and also the behaviours of our accountancy apprenticeship standard. So if I were an auditor, I would accept this entry, completion of ethics course. Okay, just about. But what I'd prefer to see is you telling me that you completed the ethics e-learning course and you've learned something. I now understand the principles of ethics, and I learned the impact of ethics in accounting in the public sector. That indisputably says to a Department for Education auditor, I've thought about what I have learned. I am developing as an apprentice. I understand what I gained from this piece of learning, and it is going into my off-the-job training log as a legitimate, relevant entry to my off-the-job training record. Okay, so that's off-the-job training in Smart Assessor. We need to see at least 1 entry going into Smart Assessor in each calendar month. Okay, so the thing that I always suggest is registering for CPD Bites. So that's one of the student membership services that you have, is access to CPD Bites. And if you do that, if you register, it will send you an email every week. And then if you do the bite or a different one from the back catalogue, because there are lots to choose from, you could then go into Smart Assessor, enter that 15-minute bit of e-learning in your off-the-job training record. If you schedule a time to do that every week, then you're definitely going to be well within the 1 entry per month, and there's just no risk. You could take a couple of weeks holiday, and if you're doing entries in the other weeks that month, you're definitely not going to fall foul of this issue. While you're in there, you can think, what else have I done this week that can go in my off-the-job training log? Have I attended any college? Have I done any sessions that developed any relevant knowledge, skills or behaviours? It can be something formal that your employer sends you on. So it could be a presentation skills course. It could be conference. If you go to the CIPFA conference, it could be that. But it could be something as simple as you just sit down with your manager or a more experienced colleague and they take you through something. a new bit of legislation, some new guidance, last year's working papers, something that you didn't know before you spent that time with them. If you can articulate what you learned from that, and it's relevant to any part of the knowledge, skills and behaviours, it can go in your off-the-job training record. There's no maximum to off-the-job training, so you do not have to do any agonising about, is this a good enough entry to include or not? Just put it in. If it's in work time and it moved your knowledge, skills and behaviours forward, in it goes into your off-the-job training record. Now, the one thing to be clear about with off-the-job training is your employer does need to make sure that you get enough time for the minimum. And to be eligibly claiming the funding, they do need to be prioritising making this apprenticeship work. So giving you the time to attend college, for example. But conversely, if there is something happening at work that is genuinely going to be more developmental for you, and you have a conversation with your line manager that says, do you know what, it would be really good if you could attend that conference or receive that training or be a part of that thing that is happening on this day, and you can catch up the tuition on a recording, because we genuinely do feel that actually this other thing you'd be missing instead will be really developmental, that's absolutely fine. It can be that way round. There is also no guarantee that they will give you every single hour that you need to prepare for the exams. Okay, the exams themselves, the passing of the CIPFA exams, sits outside the mandated apprenticeship, just because of the way the Department for Education have set it up. So you cannot count an exam in your off-the-job training. If you do a mock to prepare for an exam, this is an audit trail. We all know what audit trails need to be like. Let's be smart about this. Don't call it an exam. Don't call it a mock exam. Call it what it is, practice of whatever came up on that mock paper. So if there were questions on cash flow statements, if there were questions on, I don't know, particular decision-making models in the paper, then you can include the time you spent on the mock in your off-the-job training record, but talk about what you learned, practiced or developed. Don't say the word exam anywhere in your off-the-job training record. Okay, so hopefully that was a useful insight into off-the-job training. Before I go on to work experience, have we got any questions that I can answer?
Emily?
Hiya. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could explain in the example of the time log that you had on the screen, you had action complete first work experience write-up, and you had that in as an activity. Is that something that would count towards off-the-job hours, writing up a work experience?
It potentially could, is the answer. It's a really good question, Emily, actually. So the answer is yes, if you can explain how it has developed something that is relevant to the apprenticeship standard. Now, the apprenticeship standard includes business insight, continuous improvement, leadership, which starts with leadership of yourself and motivation and accountability, etc. So in writing up a piece of work experience, if you're doing it properly, you are thinking about your insight into the organisation, the value of the work that you do, the contribution that it makes to the bigger picture. You're definitely improving your communication skills because you're presenting financial information in a way that you ultimately want somebody else to understand. So yes, I think writing up your work experience can count, but don't just put wrote up work experience. Yeah, say that you worked on explaining the role you took in freedom of information requests, or the role that you took in budget monitoring, or because that's the thing that's relevant. What's relevant is that you were working on developing your ability to explain and communicate those concepts which are relevant to the accountancy apprenticeship standard. And that in itself was developmental and can go in your off-the-job training log. So a lot of this with the off-the-job training entries, it's about how you think about it and how you present it. Don't say what you did, say what you learned from what you did. And then the answer is usually yes, it can go in. Did that help?
Yes, to be honest, I am struggling with these entries, and I have got support from my coach. I'm finding this bit of the apprenticeship much harder than the actual CIPFA work, to be honest.
Right, okay.
I'm finding it really difficult to link every entry to the knowledge, skills and behaviours grids. For example, if I'm having a one-to-one with a manager or, attending something like this, I don't know how, so this hour that we're doing here counts towards off the job hours, but I don't know what link this has to any of the knowledge, skills and behaviours, because in my mind, this session is more about the apprenticeship rather than about me working as an accountant.
Yeah, I understand that. And there is an argument that, if, for example, you're just doing induction, then the Department for Education say, yeah, that can't count. That's just a general part of being an employee. That's not going to make you a better accountant. But I think that many of the softer skills and behaviours within the grid are about clearly communicating. They're about ethics and integrity. They're thinking about what a clear audit trail should look like. So first of all, today, you could say you thought about the audit trail that you need to keep to justify the funding that you gain for your level 7 apprenticeship. That's about organisational insight, so what's called business insight in the grid, but it's also about that ethics and integrity. It's considering what makes a fair audit trail, where the burden of responsibility should sit for you to prove to the Department for Education that their money is being used in a justifiable way. So I would say that you could link this session, considering off-the-job training, to ethics and integrity. So I understand, I can see that that's tricky and that might not immediately occur to you. But I think as you get more familiar with the grid and you start looking at it and thinking, okay, are there any words that Helen used there that appear on the skills and behaviours grid, and balancing the need for a clear audit trail, that appears on the skills and behaviours grid. We definitely talked about audit trail. I'll reference it to that. Okay. But that is one of the things that your progress review meetings with your coach can and should be about. That if you make an off-the-job training entry, one of the things that we really encourage apprentices to do as you develop your relationship with your coach is make those progress review meetings proactive and about you. Plan for those meetings like you would any other work meeting. So you could go to that meeting with an entry made in your off-the-job training log and ask them, say, look, is this a thing that I can put in? I was kind of thinking that we talked about audit trails. Is that going to work? They can discuss it with you. Often the very act of discussing it, you tease out, yeah, okay, that's a sensible thing that I could write. I think the other thing is not to be scared of it and try making an entry and see if you can think of something sensible to put in that column. Because the other thing to bear in mind here, I'm trying to use the mouse for the wrong computer now. Here we go. If you look in the top right up here, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving on the screen share, but there's a little yellow pencil in a box. And when you hover over it, it says edit. And there's also a red dustbin. So if you get into your progress review meeting with your coach and actually when you talk about it, you agree, yeah, do you know what, fire safety training, that's not going to make me a better accountant, that does need to come out, you just hit the dustbin. The world hasn't stopped turning, nothing bad will happen. So, or conversely, if they're like, yeah, okay, not a bad entry, but I think you've not written enough or you've not written the right thing, you click the edit and the box pops up again and you can scroll down to the bit where you've written just completion of ethics course and you can add more. Okay, so it is really very easy to amend, change, delete. You know, it's popped up there straight away. I've added more to that entry. So my advice, Emily, would be put it in. And if you're struggling to make the link to the grid, just look through the grid and say, okay, are there words jumping out at me that seem relevant? But also use your coach for that too, and say proactively in the meeting, I want to bring up this off the job training entry. Let me share my screen. Let's look at Smart Assessor together. Look, I've made this entry. Do you think that cuts the grade as a compliant entry or not? What could I or should I have said in that box? Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. Work experience. I'm conscious that, you know, there's lots of stuff to cover and I was late, which is entirely my fault. But work experience, I think, is strictly distinct from off the job training. And the key thing is to think about why we're doing it and the number of purposes that it serves. So when you make a work experience entry, let me just slip back to a slide, just try and move you guys out in the middle of the screen. No, it doesn't want to do that. Right. So the record of your work activities in which you demonstrate any level of competence against any of the skills and behaviours. So just some background rules for work experience. The first pieces that you upload can be anything below or at the same level as the scores in your initial assessment. So if you're brand new on the apprenticeship and you're writing up work experience that is from just before your first day in learning, you can go up to but not beyond your initial assessment scores. Because obviously if you went higher than them from before the start of your apprenticeship, that would imply that you hadn't thought about your initial assessment carefully enough and those scores were wrong. And we do not want to be telling the Department for Education that we think those scores are wrong. So when you're writing up work experience from before your first day in learning, up to but no higher than your initial assessment scores. And you'll have noticed I've referred to work experience from before your first day in learning. That's a key difference between off-the-job training and work experience. Off-the-job training cannot be any sooner than your first day on programme, your induction day on the 3rd of September, if you just started with us in September. Work experience, if you don't already have an exemption from the 400-day total, then you can include work experience from earlier than the start date of your apprenticeship. But as I say, don't go beyond the scores you had in your initial assessment. When you upload your work experience pieces, you are effectively doing at least 3 things all at once. First of all, you are totting up days which are going to count towards the CIPFA requirement for 400 days in a portfolio the day you become a CIPFA member. So to put you forward for CIPFA membership, we have got to have 400 days in there. So the first thing your work experience pieces are adding up to is that required portfolio of 400 days. Everybody has to do that, whether they're an apprentice or not. You're going to do it on the apprenticeship and with support. The second thing you're doing is mapping those skills and behaviours that were relevant to that piece of work. Now, the 400-day portfolio has to be relevant work. As soon as you map to any of the skills and behaviours, because the entire accountancy profession has agreed that these skills and behaviours are relevant to accountancy, by definition, that piece of work becomes relevant. So it's in your portfolio and it's eligible. But you're also, when you map to the skills and behaviours, providing the second element of proof of eligibility to use the apprenticeship levy. You're proving that you are moving forward on the skills and behaviours while you're on programme. By definition, an apprenticeship has to be about the knowledge and the skills and behaviours. So if I were to let you just sit the exams, then you would become exam qualified. You wouldn't become a chartered accountant the day that you finished. You would have to go away after passing the exams and do your 400-day portfolio and submit it separately and pay for it to be assessed. And that would be a delay on average of about 18 months between becoming exam qualified and becoming a chartered accountant. This way, you're going to become a chartered accountant the day you finish. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that we can't use the apprenticeship levy to fund your tuition and support unless we can prove that we're moving forward not just the knowledge by you passing the exams, but also the skills and behaviours by us documenting your work experience and how it's moving your skills and behaviours forward. So there absolutely still is a commercial route to qualification where you just do the exams. But the downside to that is that somebody has to pay for the tuition and the assessment of the portfolio at the end and the case study exam at the end, all of which are currently covered by the apprenticeship levy. And you'd still have to do the 400-day portfolio in order to become a chartered accountant and gain your CIPFA letters after your name. But you'd have to do it on your own without the support of a coach and after you had finished the exams. You're not allowed to submit the portfolio until after you're confirmed as exam qualified. So those are the reasons why we're doing it this way. The evidence that CIPFA asks for in the portfolio is the reflective account. So they don't want to see any spreadsheets, any models, any actual evidence in the traditional sense of what that word means. The only thing they want to see is your reflective account that says, tell us what you've done. Most importantly, tell us what you individually were responsible for. Because when the assessor looks at your portfolio, they can't give you credit for what anybody else did. So we need to know what you did. So use the first person tense. Talk about I did this, I did that, I was responsible for the other. If you just say a meeting was held or a report was written, I don't know whether you held the meeting, I don't know whether you were even at the meeting, and I don't know if you wrote the report or not. So you need to be very explicit about what you did. You then need to explain which skills and behaviours, and you can use as many of the 10 as are relevant to that individual piece of work as you want to. And you can pick whichever level looks right for that piece of work, for that skill or that behaviour. You can have a mix of as many or as few skills and behaviours as you like for that piece of work, and the levels don't have to be the same. So you could say, well, I think this piece of work was really tricky on communication, and I had to do a presentation of financial information where I had to be the person in the room who knew most about that. That's a 3 for presentation. So map that to a level 3. But conversely, you might say, well, I got involved in tasks which supported the sharing of that information, but it wasn't me that brought together all the colleagues and the partners around that issue. That was my manager. They made all of this happen, but they asked me, go away, do this work, become the expert and present it. So I'm going to say for building relationships, that was a 2, because actually it was my manager, not me, that did the level 3 description of the bringing everything together and coordinating. So those are the sorts of nuanced decisions that you're taking. You're just looking at the grid and saying, okay, I've done this piece of work. I'm describing what happened. My manager sent me to find out everything there was to know on this particular area of spend. I became the expert. I then came back and presented to people on that. So I'm calling that a 2 for building relationships, but a 3 for communication. But the point is, no one's going to die in a ditch over whether it was a 2 or a 3. Those levels in the grid are stepping stones that I've developed, made up for want of a better phrase, so that we can track progression. And so nobody is in any doubt that you are moving forward. But no one's going to audit whether you picked a 2 or a 3, as long as you and your coach and your manager are collectively comfortable with the level that you've picked and everyone's happy to sign it, then we're all good. The only thing we need to make sure is that by the time you get to the end of the apprenticeship, you have all 10 skills and behaviours mapped in Smart Assessor all the way to a 6. because what that means is you will have taken all of the steps needed to get you to the point where you're fully competent in that skill or that behaviour. So within Smart Assessor, you're going to be uploading those pieces of work against the work experience tab. So if we go back in Smart Assessor, I'm going to wake up. Having a little think. There we go. So it's this turquoise work experience tab that you want. You go into that turquoise tab and there is a turquoise tile that says upload work. In CIPFA Learning, I've given you a template that you can write up your work experience pieces in. I strongly recommend using it. It's not compulsory. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, but it's structured so that it matches the marking scheme for the project report questions. So the project report questions that you'll do as part of your endpoint assessment, we might as well be practicing for those project report answers right from the beginning. So use that format, get used to the sections that the project report answers will want, and get feedback as you go along from your coach about that section worked really well, or that was too descriptive. I still don't really understand the context of the task. Cut the waffle out. What actually was the point of doing this? Yeah. So use the format, whether that's same subheadings in a work document or whether that's the template, which I think is easier and I would suggest using, doesn't matter. But once you have that written in a draft form that it will be useful for your coach and your manager to look at, that's when you go into the work experience tab and hit the upload work tile. And there's a pink button here that says show add evidence. I have to click that as an extra step because I'm logged in as an assessor. But once I do, I can drag and drop the file into there and I can add that file. Okay. When you want to map your individual pieces of work experience, you can flit between the things you want to map to by choosing the drop downs in this filter here. Now, to start with, you are going to be mapping mainly to the work experience log section. So you'll tick one statement of expertise area and the blocks of days that you want to include this mapping in. And you're also going to want to go to the professional standard so that you can tick skills and behaviours if you want to map to both of those. Okay. Once you've picked those, then you will use the tick icon to move into the specific mapping sections and pick the individual skills and the individual behaviours and the levels that you want to use. Okay. The instruction manual handbook that we've given you has screen by screen shots of these things that you need to do, but your coach can also help you with them. So again, my message would be, as soon as you have got a piece that is ready to go in, have a go at putting it in, because then if you go to your progress review meeting and you say to your coach, okay, I've uploaded this piece of work and I think I've tried to map it to this number of days, this one statement of expertise area, and the following skills and behaviours, then your coach can help with, okay, does it look right from my perspective in Smart Assessor? The other people that can help you with this, if the handbook isn't cutting it and you still are struggling with it, are the apprenticeship team. So you can always email the apprenticeship team as well, and we will jump on a screen share with you, we'll help. We don't want this to be an onerous, difficult thing to do. And the reality is that I've lost count now. We've got close to 1,000 apprentices doing this apprenticeship standard now. I've lost count of the number of people who've said to me, do you know what, I really hated Smart Assessor. It's not intuitive. I looked at the handbook and thought, oh, really? You want me to tick all of these boxes? But once I'd done it 2 or 3 times, I was like, yeah, okay. It's tedious. It makes me tick a lot of things, but it does work. It does what it says on the tin, and it has produced a record, which then in your portfolio will keep a running total of the days that you have mapped and the skills and behaviours that you've mapped. So if you go into the skills, for example, you can see which ones are ticked off. When you hover above them, it expands in a little box there. I don't know if it shows on the screen share, but it says, be responsive to the needs of internal colleagues for financial information. Okay. When you upload the work, you need to make sure that you sign it off. You're signing to say, I confirm that this is my work. I've done it. It's true. Okay, so your sign off, and that will be followed by your manager's sign off and your coach's sign off. Okay. Now, the reason that we do all of that signing off is so that it can be your portfolio for submission. So kind of the overarching 3 uses that we're putting this to mean that you've proved that you're complying with the funding requirements and you're moving forward with your skills and behaviours. You're building your 400-day portfolio. You're never going to have to do that again. You're also never going to have to upload it anywhere else either. We give CIPFA access to it and they look at it in Smart Assessor. So unlike, I don't know, AAT, for example, where you have to take all of your portfolio content and upload it to another portal, none of that. We just let CIPFA look at it in Smart Assessor. And it will mean that you can answer the 16 or the 4 that you're allocated of the 16 project report questions when you get to endpoint assessment. So I don't know if any of you are anywhere near endpoint assessment yet. I don't want to scare you too much with endpoint assessment and its rules and its requirements, but the whole point is we are practicing right from the beginning. I'm more than happy to answer questions about endpoint assessment and more detail about it if that would help. So I think in conclusion, I would say don't be scared of Smart Assessor. Use the handbook, jump in, have a go with it. And if you need help with it, absolutely that help is here. But most people say to me once they've wrestled with it just a little bit, yeah, actually it wasn't that bad. It's just ticking. And it does go in the handbook step by step through what you want me to tick. So get ahead with it is my biggest piece of advice, really. Your job demands and possibly also life demands usually grow over the course of the apprenticeship. You usually get busier and more responsibility at work. So now is the time, probably better than any other time, to just get going on this and get ahead with it. Lots of people have also said to me after the end of their apprenticeship, I look back and I realised that I had access to a chartered accountant once every 12 weeks who did not want to talk about anything other than me, my progress and my career development. That free career coaching is a valuable thing in itself. And later on in your career, you'll probably look back and think, wow, I had access once every 3 months to a chartered accountant who wanted to do nothing other than look at my development, my progression, and the future of my career. So hopefully see it that way and use it. Absolutely use it for what it's there for. Kind of acknowledge the value of what you're putting into your portfolio as future preparation for your project report question answers. You are going to make that endpoint assessment project report answer stage really easy if you have got portfolio entries that already basically look like a project report question answer. So if you can put the effort in now to preparing those portfolio entries, you're absolutely going to thank yourself when you get to that project report point. But I've also actually had loads of apprentices say to me, I didn't realise as I was building my portfolio the extent to which it was preparation for interviews. If you're going for even internal promotions in the later stages of your apprenticeship or when you finish your apprenticeship, that competency-based interviewing, that give me an example of when you solved a complex problem by using strong communication skills. Those are all the things we've been asking you to reflect on, think about and write about in your portfolio. And actually lots of people have said to me, My interview went really well, and the best preparation for it was reading through my portfolio before I went into the interview, because it reminded me of all the things I had done over the last 2-3 years of my career, all of the skills and behaviours that I do have, and I could talk about them really competently and confidently because I spent time thinking about them and writing about them. Okay, I'm going to stop talking and stop sharing because I'm conscious that I've done an awful lot of both. Did that come anywhere near to what you were hoping to hear? And do you have any questions at all?
I am hoping it has. Thank you so much, Helen, especially that last bit. I think I can see the whole portfolio, the work experience write-up and OTJ and all of it in a different light, especially the write-up. I am also struggling, just like Emily was saying, I am struggling with all the write-ups and the OTJ, especially keeping on top of it, especially with the work pressures. And I've got a young family as well. So it is really, and on top of that, sandwich in between that is your tuition and your work. Either your progress test is coming up or mock is coming up, is sandwiched in between all of that. So there is so many things going on that sometimes I say, oh, I don't want to deal with Smart Assessor right now. It's not there. But I think from listening to you, I can see how valuable it is and how valuable it can be. And really, we should all try to make time to spend some time on it. We've got some questions that have come in the chat. One of them is asking something like if they earned a certification through any body, any international federation, for example, an International Federation of Accountancy certification, would that count as part of your OTJ as a new learning? Or is that
potentially, if it's something that you've done before the apprenticeship, then no, because off the job training can only be on program. So if you've done this already previously, then no. But if you do it while you're on program, then yes, if it's relevant to accountancy, then it can definitely go in your off the job training log, as long as you did it in work time.
Okay. The next one is about examples of write-ups so that people can see what actually can fit, what you can put in, what can be a good write-up and what cannot. I was just playing as you were speaking. I was just playing with Smart Assessor, and I think I found somewhere where is in resources.
Yes. So there are two things. I'm gonna steal back the screen share and I'm gonna show you hopefully a couple of things. So the first thing you're going to see, this is me logged into CIPFA Learning. So you should be familiar with this, as this is where you find all of your tuition, etc. But if you go into the level 7 apprenticeship page, then you will see in the how-to sections of that page, you see down the left-hand side here, we've got the welcome handbooks and the overview. So that's the induction presentation, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But we've also got in the useful documents all of the grid, the skills and behaviours grid, the statement of expertise guide. And we have got in here the optional work experience template. And then we've got examples of a midpoint work experience write-up and also a higher level work experience write-up. So these are showing you examples of what I would like to see in a work experience write-up. This one is a right at the end level 6 kind of example, not where you're going to be if you're earlier in your apprenticeship, but this is more of a midpoint. And it's written in italics in here. This is the sort of thing I want you to be thinking about when you write in this box. So why was the work needed? And how did you get involved in the task? Did you see a problem and go to your manager and pitch to be allowed to do something about it? Or did your manager come to you and say, here's a piece of work I want to delegate to you? Or was it part of a routine thing that has to be happening in a workflow within the organisation? These budget meetings happen every month. I've been given the following budgets to look after and to go to the monthly meetings about, or freedom of information requests come into the local authority on a regular basis. I'm responsible for answering the ones that have got a finance component to them. Explain why the work needed doing at all, how it happened, how it came about, what the context of it was, if you like. And then your description of your roles and responsibilities. So first person, my task, but then some examples of some feedback here, which is, well, this isn't detailed enough. I don't know whether you were making small contributions in minor areas, whether they had to be amended, whether you got any feedback. So think of this as if you were answering an interview question, actually, what would you want to tell the interviewer? This is an example of something I did. Okay, what did you do? What was your level of role and responsibility? Did you have to have support and help from a manager? Did you get feedback as you went along? Or are you standing on your own 2 feet and, you know, deciding these things yourself now? Think about the skills and behaviours, literally systematically go through the grid. All of the coaches have this laminated grid as well. And when we look at a piece of work experience, familiar as we are with it, we deliberately go through all 10 going, could I include that? Does that look relevant? And then working through the boxes. As I say, not critical which box you pick, as long as it looks credible and you've thought about it. So I would say, if I was writing in this section, what I would want to do is to pick up some of the words from the grid. So if, for example, if we go back to our communication example and it says regularly present financial information to others as the expert knowledge, sorry, as the knowledge expert even, if you can state those words, but then prove it. So, okay, you're regularly presenting financial information. What financial information? I'm regularly presenting budgetary control information to the school's finance team. Okay, now I've given some credible evidence around this. And how am I the knowledge expert? Well, I'm the knowledge expert because I have calculated all of the variances. I have the most up-to-date knowledge of current variance levels, etc. Yeah, so think about how you can justify the statement that you're making. And I guess if you're struggling with this, one of the questions I encourage people to ask themselves is, okay, if I wrote that, would somebody looking at it know which skill or behaviour I was talking about? And does it sound like I really did it? Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about? If I can say I have confidently presented this budgetary information to this school's finance team meeting, and so I think without even you having to write it, I'm thinking, okay, you're presenting financial information and you were the expert on that specific particular thing.
Okay.
For the lessons learned. Oh, yeah, go on.
Okay. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say,
on,
for the
Helen.
lessons learned, it's about proving to CIPFA that you're going to be safe to let out for continuing professional development. Do you know what you need to do to keep yourself competent and safe as an accountant? So is it that you went back to the original guidance, or that you questioned the way that it had been done last year, or that you sought corroboration for some data that you'd been given because you don't always trust that everything that you're given is right? So in Smart Assessor, these same resources are indeed also there. You're absolutely right. So if you look in the portfolio, as you go through the tabs, you will see that individual resources are there in a resources tile. So if you click on the resources tile in the relevant tabs, you'll see the good things there as well. So there are common areas of work mapped to the project report questions. There's examples of good project report answers because this is under the project report tile. Whereas if you looked under the work experience tile, you'd see different things in the resources tab for that, including the grid and the expertise guide and the practical work experience template and the same midpoint and higher level example. Okay.
Yeah.
If you look in,
sorry.
I was just going to answer the next question that I'd spotted in the chat, which was, where are the 16 questions? So if you go into the project report tile, In the resources under there, you will see the Endpoint Assessment Handbook, but you will also see that in the CIPFA learning environment as well. So basically, we duplicate all of these resources. So whichever system you're logged into, you should be able to find it. So if you go into the section under the Level 7 apprenticeship page called Endpoint Assessment Guidance, there is the Endpoint Assessment Handbook. And if you go through to the later stages of that handbook, there's the bank of 16 questions that you could be asked at endpoint assessment. You get one question from each bank, A, B, C, and D. So you know the 16 that you could be asked, and you'll get one from each bank of those questions.
And the difference between the work experience log and the professional qualification on Smart Assessor?
Okay, so in Smart Assessor, so the work experience log is where you're going to upload each of the write-ups that you have done in the template. Okay, the professional qualification, that includes just your exam passes. So you don't need to upload anything here at all. And the apprenticeship team does all of this for you. Okay, so every time you pass an exam, we'll go into the relevant exam and we will upload evidence from the exams team that you either have an exemption for that or that you have passed that exam. So we have that professional qualification tab principally for the team to use. Actually, you don't need to do anything with that one. The key ones that you're going to be using from the beginning are in the overview tab, the off the job training tile, and in the work experience log tab, the turquoise tile to upload the pieces of work that you've written.
Okay. And is Smart Assessor only for apprentices, or do other students also use? Okay, so it's just for apprentices.
So just the apprentices,
And I did when I was looking at Smart Assessor, I noticed that after the SPFM, that is the only one you can pick as a module when you're logging your OTJ. My question is, what about your tuition for the case study? Can you not log that? How do you log that then?
You absolutely can log that. Although the reason that it's not there as a module is it's a complicated technical reason. It's a good question. So the apprenticeship standard divides what they call the 11 preceding modules, which are financial accounting and management accounting, all the way through to SPFM. And those are what they call the 11 preceding modules that you have to already hold passes in to be allowed to go through Gateway. Once you've gone through Gateway, you do two parts to the endpoint assessment, which is the case study exam and the project report. But the case study exam doesn't have any new syllabus. So there's no new knowledge for the case study exam. It is just about preparing exam technique, preparing to present those documents in the way that the examiner is looking for. And so realistically, those sound usually more like skills and behaviours and the application of knowledge rather than new knowledge itself. So we would usually expect to see that mapped to the apprenticeship standard rather than to the professional qualification.
Okay. So, but is that the tuition you do for that, is that included in your minimum OTJ?
Yes, it is. So you would still put that into your off-the-job training log, but when you go in and you're filling in those boxes, I would say for case study tuition, I would pick the accountancy standard, not the professional qualification.
Not the professional qualification.
And all the way up to the end. So before we sign your Gateway declaration, everything you're doing counts. So once you get the advanced material for the case study exam, and you do that last revision session that's based on the advanced material for that specific exam, that all still counts as off-the-job training. And we won't kind of close down your off-the-job training log until you've done that last case study session And so everything gets captured up to that point.
Up
And
to
it's
that.
only when we
Okay.
physically sign your gateway declaration that we have to shut things.
Okay. And then with the time you spend on doing your OTJ or doing your work experience write-up, are the employers required to give you that time, or is that going to be on your own time?
That's a really good question. So your employer is required to give you the minimum off-the-job training hours. They can't be drawing the apprenticeship levy to fund your qualification unless they are giving you those minimum hours. But the reality is, if they give you that time, you could use that time in a number of ways. And if you've chosen to use the time that they've given you on something else, and you haven't therefore got your off-the-job training up to date or your work experience logs written, they could say, do you know what? I think we've given you enough time. You're going to have to do that in your own time now. And as long as they are giving you above the minimum, then they are compliant with the rules. And that's fair enough. Conversely, though, I do have conversations with employers where I'm perhaps, the person advocating for the apprenticeship and for you as the apprentice, and saying to employers, and I meet with line managers all the time, and sometimes what happens is the organisation as a whole understands the apprenticeship and is completely on board with it. But you might have a new line manager who was not party to that conversation, doesn't know how the apprenticeship is supposed to work. And I sometimes have meetings with those line managers and say, right, let me talk to you about how this has to work. Because if we're going to carry on claiming the levy, we've got to be seen to prioritise the development of your apprentice. Yeah, so I absolutely can and do help to advocate for that. And sometimes it is just that line managers just don't know. They, the decision to put you on an apprenticeship was perhaps taken by a previous manager or taken by a finance lead, but not by your specific manager. And they say, whoa, I didn't know that. I didn't know that you were supposed to be having this time or this focus on your development, or that you needed these particular bits of work experience to be able to answer your project report questions. So sometimes it can be helpful for us to have that conversation. One of the things that you can potentially use, actually, if I just I'm doing the same thing with the mouse, just very, very quickly show you that in the CIPFA Learning page, if we go back up to the Welcome and Handbooks section, you'll see that I include the employer resources in here. So this is the introduction that I give to the employers, and also the slide handbook for the employer are all there as well. So if you have a new manager who's saying, I just don't know what you're asking for, I don't know what's expected, you could download these resources. And it's little 3 dots there, and there's the option to download. And you could share them with that manager and say, look, I'm not making this stuff up. Here is a recording of Helen explaining this stuff, and Helen is also willing to just talk to you and have a conversation if that would help.
Okay, thank you. So in my organization, one of the things they tend to focus on is when am I out of tuition, so that they know that I am fully for them, because they seem to think that it's only when I am in tuition that they're required to give me those hours, and when I'm out of tuition that I now belong to them. So they're always going, when is this course ending, or when is this module ending? So we know. But from what I can understand, I should be having that average amount of hours every week until my course ends, not just during the tuition.
And that's the thing, it is an average. And so some weeks, if you're doing 2 modules, you will need 2 tuition days. So some weeks you'll be above that average of about 6 hours a week. And so that's going to be balanced by some weeks in which your employer can quite justifiably say, look, I gave you 2 days in those weeks, so I'm giving you no days in these weeks. And that's fair, that's allowed. But an apprenticeship is continuous learning and development. And if that's not the way that this can work, then that would be the commercial model of the qualification without the apprenticeship levy funding. And so the big plus to the employer is, if we do it this way, you can use your levy pot, you can use your apprenticeship levy pot, but we have to do it the way the Department for Education says. And that means continuous learning, an average of this development time available to your learners right the way through their programme. But it is an average, so it could be more one week and less another, could be more one week and zero another, just like it's zero when you go on holiday. If you're on annual leave, 0 hours are going to go in your off-the-job training log as well. But I would also say that if you're doing a really good piece of work experience, and that's going to give you something really useful to put in your work experience portfolio, sometimes you wouldn't want to be left out of that, actually. So there's a balance to be struck there. You don't want to be regarded as kind of supernumerary, and we won't give you any of the interesting stuff to do because you've got to worry about your college and your development. You do also want to be given some of the good, interesting, juicy pieces of work experience to go in your portfolio as well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for that, Helen. It's been quite insightful. I for one have learned quite a lot. I thought, especially with the work experience one, I honestly will walk away today with a different view on how to look at it, because honestly, in the past I've always seen it as a nuisance. I'm like, why do I have to do this now? But now I can understand that it's not just about, I have to also think about it in a different way. So especially in as a preparation for interview, that sold it for me, because when you write it down, it's one of those things that you can remember. You go, you sit in front of an interview, you could use it as an example. So thank you very much for showing that. And that to all the students that were here, I hope, like me, you've been able to gain something from that. And as Helen said, if your employer is not giving you those time, maybe reach out to Helen and see how she can help to speak to your employer.